very artistic.
They just want us to start.
Oh, they just want us to start. Okay.
All right, they would like us to start. Shall we start? Shall we begin? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to do introductions? Am I supposed to do introductions? Maybe we'll all introduce ourselves. I'm Carla Nielsen. I'm senior curator of literary collections at the Huntington Library in town, and had the privilege of working with Leah Slubsey already on a project, and I'm really delighted. Don't know that I can, but I'll try. Really delighted to be here today to talk to Leah and Amanda, who will introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you for coming. I'm Amanda Marchand, and really thrilled to welcome you here for our exhibition today.
Hi, I'm Leah Slubsey, and also thrilled to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you to Gallery 12 for putting on our show.
Yeah.
And for increasing the number of chairs as more and more people come into the room, which is great to see. Well, we're here today to discuss the ongoing collaboration that Leah and Amanda have been in called This Earthen Door, which resulted in a beautiful book that came out in 2024, and then a series of prints, some of which you've seen in these two rooms, and some very gorgeous data visualizations, and which is also an ongoing project, which we can talk a little bit more. But I mean, you two have known each other for a very long time. Like, how many, at this point, what are you going on?
Many. We don't like to disclose.
A polite,
Many.
And this is a very long, you're at least 5 years into this collaboration, which began in 2020 around a shared interest in thinking with plants, thinking with the 19th century. And then do you want to talk a little bit how you arrived from kind of that shared interest to deciding to focus on Emily Dickinson?
Sure, yeah. Well, so Amanda and I met in graduate school at the San Francisco Art Institute, and had a lot of overlap in terms of how we think about photography in an experimental way. And we sort of knew we wanted to work on a project together at some point, and we talked about it for many years, and it sort of took the pandemic to give us the time and the space to do that. We like to just bat things back and forth because we talk on the phone and FaceTime every day. So we'll just pass it back and forth. So do you want to take a little bit?
Yeah, Leah and I both approach photography, which has a traditional background, in a very experimental way, and we're very process-based, and I think that both of us love playing with the medium, which is so open and so ever-changing. And so this has been a commonality. When we decided we would work with this project, we didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't know how we would work with images, whether they would be more traditional photographs or if we would do something different as happened. And that was a process of just communicating what we wanted to make and then exploring. So we went away and we rented a cottage. Residencies had shut down. We had applied for a few and everything was closed down because it was the first year of the pandemic. So we rented a cottage near where Emily Dickinson lives in Amherst, maybe 20 minutes away. And we just started playing with all kinds of materials to figure out what we would do, and we were reading reading Dickinson poetry, drinking wine, trying to figure out which direction to go. Mm-hmm.
So the works that you've seen are anthrotypes inspired by Emily Dickinson's herbarium. Now, does everyone in this room know what all of those words mean? Because I will do my best to kind of start talking about what an herbarium is, and then I'll let the two photographers explain how anthrotypes work, because both are very important. But yeah, an herbarium is a book that an individual keeps with specimens or drawings of plants, sometimes a combination of drawings and pressed plant specimens. Some of them that are more scientific, try to capture all stages of a plant's growth, and maybe we'll have the Latin name, but they really take a number of forms, and they were very important ways, particularly for women in the 19th century, to engage with botany. It was a type of scientific inquiry and engagement with the natural world that was considered kind of allowable. And Dickinson's herbarium, she began at a very young age, like in her teens. And I think it's a very beautiful project that kind of thinks with her, with Dickinson, who we know as a poet, but is perhaps less well known as a gardener, but he was like an avid gardener and thought about poems and flowers together often. There's numerous poems, many cited in the book, where she makes that comparison. And then you stayed with both, you didn't try to reproduce her herbarium, which has 424 pages, but you chose 66 and then kind of used the herbarium as a jumping off place, because that was in Amherst, but then you took the project back to North Carolina and to Montreal. Do you want to talk about how that stage of the project went?
Sure. So we knew what we were going to do, and we split the herbarium pages, Dickinson's 66 herbarium pages, in half, and I took the odd numbers and you took the even numbers. And then the anthotype portion is a word meaning, antho in Greek means flower. So an anthotype is a photograph made from a plant emulsion. So we made our own photographic paper with plants that we grew in our own, regions. Leah was in North Carolina, and I was, for that part of the pandemic, I was north of Montreal. And
so in thinking about the anthotype, it's a historical 19th century photographic process. And like many things in the science world, a woman was doing research on the anthotype and trying to make color photography. So she was using plants to do that. And
Mary Somerville.
So Mary Somerville was a Scottish polymath who was doing that research but was not able to publish because she was a woman. And what we kind of love about this project, she was at home, she was like ironing, prints, and thinking about kind of the history of women and the role of art and science and how they were overlooked. And what's interesting about Mary Somerville is she, was doing this incredible research, and the term scientist was invented because of her. So prior to that, there was only a term, it was referred to as man of science. And so Mary Somerville came on the scene, and they didn't have a word for her to name her. So scientist was invented for Somerville. So that's kind of the history of thinking about the anthotype, again, using plant pigments to make photographic emulsion. They're very slow to process. Our shortest exposure is an hour, and our longest one took over 3 months in the sun. So it's a really kind of labor of time and thinking about photography as this kind of essence of capturing time. So I can't remember exactly which one was our 3 month, but we have some
we have some long exposures. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and I think I had maybe the longer exposures with the Canadian sun in the summer and a lot of rain that first summer especially, and Leah with like the brilliant, strong exposures in North Carolina. Hers were going a lot more quickly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the plants are in the anthotypes and in your prints in two ways, right? There's specimens that are, you lay down the pigment derived from certain flowers, and then you also lay not necessarily the same plant on top of that.
So each of our images that looks like a flower page is one of Dickinson's actual pages, and sometimes you can see her handwriting that is translated through. So we're not actually laying any flowers on top. We're just taking a digital negative and putting it in the sun with glass on top and exposing. And then the other part are these color stories, where those are our plant pigments, which would then become photo papers.
Yeah.
That is a different sort of section. That's our 21st century herbarium. Sort of we remade a herbarium thinking about the stories that plants tell today, where we are today, where Dickinson was, and weaving these stories and themes together with the different plant pigments. So every time you see a color, you're seeing a plant, basically, that gets included as a piece of data in that group.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for us in making this project is the original herbarium that Dickinson made is now too fragile for anyone to ever see or hold again, and it lives at Harvard, it's locked away. And so for us as image makers and Amanda as bookmaker, we felt like one of the ways that we could do that was through this process. And what would it feel like to hold this book again through this new kind of reimagining of Dickinson's herbarium? So that we sort of always knew we wanted to make a book first, and then
Not the most typical like LA sound.
I know. It does not feel like LA. And then it sort of evolved into these exhibitions. So out of that, we were able to make these kind of larger pieces in thinking about, as you were saying, these kind of data drawings. So partnering with scientists to really understand the plant stories. So each of these tells a different story in relationship to the plants and ecology and plant loss.
And I'll just echo what Leah was saying. Initially, when we knew we wanted to work with the herbarium, we knew we would never hold it, we would never see it, you will never see it, anyone even in the archives there, they don't have access to it. So it was this great object of mystery, and that's one of the amazing, powerful things about photography, the translation of light and image in these different ways that can kind of give you a version of it at least and allow us to reimagine it.
Yeah, it only lives as a digital archive now, and so that fact of this something that being so tactile, like we're the process that we're working with and growing the plants, and how we make the emulsion, we crush the plants up in a mortar and pestle with alcohol, and so there's this real kind of physicality to making the work, and hand coding papers, as opposed to now this archive that only lives in this kind of digital way.
Yeah, so as a librarian, of course, I have to be very glad that there is this digital preservation copy of Emily Dickinson's herbarium, and also, I know you've worked with Henry David Thoreau's herbarium, but those books also contain plant matter from the 19th century, and it includes some species that have subsequently gone extinct or at least have extirpated.
Yeah.
So they're incredibly fragile objects because they contain historical information, but also in some cases this very rare botanical information, genetic material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those herbariums are really valuable in many ways because of what you're saying, that scientists can go in and study them in all kinds of different ways by extracting DNA or looking at, like in Thoreau's case, charting flowering times. So we're able to look at all of this kind of historical data in a way. And as artists, we're maybe not interested in the actual data, the Excel spreadsheets, but what is the poetry that also lives in those? And how do we retell these stories from a contemporary standpoint, knowing how much has changed since Dickinson was, pressing little plants and putting them in a book.
We did our best with the Excel sheets, though.
We did.
Well, one thing that I wasn't clear how it worked until you explained it in that front room, that is very much a translation, is that, Dickinson would have been working with a knowledge of the language of flowers, that some of the flowers stood for certain emotions, or that could be gifted to someone. And Dickinson was a great gifter of nosegays, of little bouquets to people with a poem. And then in the front gallery, you have that beautiful display of different pigments from flowers that symbolize different types of love. Do you want to talk about the little one? Yeah. Do you want to?
That one's called Wild Nights, Wild Nights, and each of our pieces is titled after a Dickinson poem. She didn't technically title them, but the first line, scholars will use that as the title of the poem. So that one is called Wild Nights, Wild Nights, and all of the colors on the bottom represent romantic love, sort of the way we associate flowers with gifting, and usually in that way. But in the Victorian era, florography was very popular, and every young woman would have had at least one book in their library with all the meanings of a certain flower, and if you gave it to someone, what it would subtly, I think of it as the Morse code of flowers. And so that one, the love one, on the top, each row would have been what those flowers symbolized in the Victorian era. So there's one on marriage, friendship, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, and lust is another one.
That's nice. I think that those could definitely be extracted as a card. There's something like they're full of language, and yet there's like not a word on the page. They're very beautiful. And then the visualization in this room though is tracking something else that your project seemed very interested in, which is the cycle of the year and thinking the blooming times, and then being in different places, understanding how those were different, and also in the early 21st century tracking the impact of climate change. And how that is affecting plant growth. Do you want to talk a little bit about that particular? And I'm pointing to them, so you know where afterwards, if you want to see right around that corner, there's another.
Yeah, that first little piece when you walk into this room. So that one is our, it's called Bloom as a Result, and that one is our seasonal blooming wheel. And again, all of it kind of housing data. So the very top little purple or pink flower is Christmas cactus. That was our lone winter flower that we used. The bottom row are all of the fall flowers, and then the circles, one is spring and one is summer. And so again, thinking about, take time out. Thinking about, the garden as this kind of cycle of life. Amanda and I were both growing flowers. I was in North Carolina, and Amanda was mostly in Canada using her mom's sort of inherited garden, and then a little bit in Brooklyn. And, sort of charting things, all of this is so slow. We were waiting for things to bloom and capturing things just at the, collecting petals. And the thing with anthotypes that you'll find is that, if something is at the beginning of its bloom versus the end, you'll get a very different color. So all of these little choices of when we harvested things changed things. And there's a lot that we can't control, which I think for both of us is part of what we love about photography, that there's a lack of control. And that there is still a mystery as opposed to digital, which is very kind of, a lot of it is predetermined for us in terms of how things function. And so in this way, we were like one after another just excited about the colors that we were getting because we didn't know what would happen. So that is our seasonal blooming wheel.
It's like a garden clock.
Yeah.
We have the center ring is the fall. No, the center ring is the fall.
No, the bottom one's fall.
Well, the bottom one is the fall. The
Spring and
larger
summer,
ring is
yes.
summer, spring and summer. And there's one pink Christmas cactus winter bloom at the top.
Very vivid.
Very
Yeah.
vivid, yeah.
And one thing you noted in the book, you note about the anthotypes is that they're a completely non-toxic and renewable form of making images, because everything is derived from organic matter, which is different from other photographic processes, which are much more extractive.
Yes, that was something that was very important to us starting. We had been, we've worked in dark rooms, and I actually have a bit of a chemical allergy, so I've been moving digital, but we really were thinking about our children, the world that they're inheriting from us, and how can we work in a more sustainable way, in a way that thinks about ecology as both subject matter and material, and in a way that is doing less harm, hopefully. So these are just plants. That's all. We're not adding chemistry. There's no chemistry unless, the alcohol is, you can use vodka, you can use Everclear, you can use lemon. There needs to be something that sort of pulls the color pigments out, but it's very, very eco-friendly. And so we wanted to move in that direction. So that was a key part of deciding to use this photo process, which is also, I don't know if we mentioned, but while Dickinson was working on her herbarium as a teenager in the 1840s, the anthotype was invented exactly in 1842, so around that time. So their crossover is interesting in terms of the timeline.
So for those who haven't seen the book yet, so this was a limited edition, an edition of 1,000 copies of this book, and the anthotypes you can see make kind of like a rectangle. That's very nice with the shape of the book and the page. But it's really a lovely piece of bookmaking too that opens with a number of end papers that have the glorious color palette of the anthotypes, so you move into them. I thought this might be a good moment to talk too about the title of the project, which you took from a Dickinson poem, which, does anyone want to hear this Dickinson poem?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, because you do put it in the book. Well, I don't have to read it, and actually I just opened to the Korean version of it, which I will not be able to.
It's a true test, yeah.
True test. One of you want to read it?
Sure, I can read it. You'll notice that the first line from this poem is on the wall in this room. We can but follow to the sun. For each of the 33 stories that we made, they were titled after the first line. That one has the line, the earthen door, which we loved for its poetics and metaphor. So this is a little different, but that is associated with the big brown right there. Anyway, I'll read the poem. We can but follow to the sun, as oft as he go down. He leaves ourselves a sphere behind. 'Tis mostly following. We go no further with the dust than to the earthen door. And then the panels are reversed, and we behold no more. So, do you want to? We were talking before about the meaning of this a little bit. Do you want to say?
We can say, I'm so used to teaching that I'm very tempted to open up the question to the audience for the connotations of for readings of that poem and reading with this work that make like these beautiful rectangles that look like they're kind of like windows into the earth. But if you think of this, it's also like the shape of a garden plot, but also of a grave. And I feel like Dickinson's always asking people to kind of think joyfully with death and transition. But that's one of the reasons people assume that she is this very morbid, kind of reclusive, sad person. But I think this project actually shows like how vivid and animate the world was for her, the world of living things and sharing plants as a form of sociability with her friends. But yeah, do you? I would take a couple of thoughts from the audience, but we can also go back to the writers.
So I guess your book's almost out of print.
It is,
Are
yeah.
you going to do another edition?
Well, it's not exactly up to us. I think it's more up to the publisher, so maybe.
We'd like to.
But we're also trying to do, this is just the botanicals. It doesn't include the data drawings. So we're trying to do a larger book with all of that. So looking for the right publisher, for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
So I kind of have a multiple question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that these are digital images.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if you have kept the anthrotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that not everybody they know, but anthrotypes fade.
Yeah.
So are you keeping those somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is part of this idea of time, Dickinson, a portal to the past and the present. The anthrotype is something that is fugitive. We cannot keep it. Like, some of them act more as dyes, and the colors remain quite vivid. But for the most part, they fade, they change, and they radically change in many cases. But we do have our whole box of original anthrotypes, and we'll pull them out every now and then. And sometimes we've had some surprises, and we actually think, oh, it's really nice right now. It was stronger before, but look at how beautiful it is now. And other times, it's very, very subtle. There's almost nothing there. So.
Do you take a picture or do you scan it?
Well, no. So I think what we loved about all of this work was the fugitive nature of it, and the digital becomes a chore in many ways. So, all of these works had to be digitized, which, creates them now as archival images. So I think the thought of redoing all of that to redigitize is, I don't know, there's something about the beauty of them just being, there's an impermanence to them.
We wanted to have the digital be an equation where they matched the originals, and so we did spend a lot of time on the colors, sometimes a little more contrast, but we're photographers, so there's a little leeway there, but really the color was important because it related to the plant. And so that was, maybe there's another project there one day.
One of the things, what you were talking about with Dickinson and her relationship to plants and the natural world, and this kind of backdoor to science was through botany. And I think, one of the things that we're always thinking about that we collectively maybe have lost sight of is our relationship to plants. And there's this kind of plant invisibility now. And so how do we, for Dickinson, who knew the natural world and the plant world so intimately, how do we now connect with those and understand them and pay attention to them, because obviously we would not be here without them. We need them for survival. And so as we're, watching things disappear, just even calling attention to those is kind of part of what we're interested in. There's a piece in the other room here that is all of the rare and endangered species that would have been growing in Amherst, that are now considered rare and endangered, that would not have been when Dickinson was, making that work of the herbarium.
And I was reading recently in expanding dictionaries as we move forward in time with new technological terms, that one example of something they were thinking of removing was the word bluebell. Taking bluebell out, who really needs to know what a bluebell is, which seems crazy, but that is happening.
Right, taking those out of the dictionary, that those words become extinct in the same way that the plants do. So this kind of erasure of history, as we all know, happens so often. Yeah,
we were talking a bit before about how these people dealing with scientific data gets captured in unlikely places. So like in these kind of like poetic assemblages, or like if people are like, where do I learn about bluebells? And it's in writing about bluebells, but then it's not something that you see anymore. But one of the reasons I would love to bring these two artists to work at the Huntington is that we have like a cryopreservation lab where people are preserving seeds and like saving seeds. And do you want to say a little bit about how this project isn't over for you yet, that you're still doing like new works related to it?
Quickly before I say that, I'll just say that at the Dickinson Museum in Amherst, they're actually excavating the grounds to prove and show exactly which flowers were planted by Dickinson, which is interesting, and I think they've verified 24 of many. But that's just an aside. But this kind of work is very contemporary and going on. But do you want to talk about
I mean, one of the things that happened when we had a museum show at the Brandywine Museum of Art that closed a few months ago, we were commissioned there to make a couple of site-specific pieces. So interested in, partnering with institutions and the thinking about their ecological mission. So again, the kind of educational side of it, how do we call attention to the plants? So for example, there we made a piece on invasive species of that region, and also one of their missions is to repopulate native trees that were wiped out during a hurricane. So we are kind of taking that and trying to partner with different institutions. We're making a piece with the New York Botanical Gardens, with Point Reyes National Seashore. And so thinking about how we talk about the local ecology. So how did Dickinson, for us, like spawn this conversation to now work in the more local?
Nice. That'll be exciting to see it continue to develop. That'll be hard to understand what the next book should capture, right? As it keeps growing, you're like, at what point do you then circumscribe it again? Though I can tell that there's like a audience in this audience for this book already. Well, there's now a very, very full room of people. I'd love to take some questions. Are you ready to take some questions from anyone here about the project, the work that you've seen here?
These are not ours. We're sitting in a room of someone else's work because it's the largest room in this space. So our work is in this room, the little room in the front, and this room in here. So we could make something up though.
thematically similar?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you were talking about your UV light printer. Was there a conscious reason not to use a UV printer as opposed to wanting to use sunlight?
Yeah, I mean, for many reasons. Some of these, like we said, take months to expose. So just the sheer light bulb capability, but also just wanting to, having grown all of these plants, wanting to be outside and make these in the sun felt really essential. We never really even thought about using it. It just was off the table, I think, in terms of using a light box.
I think there's also something very poetic about the fact that these are made of earth, plant matter, and sunlight. The sun has traveled, so if the light has come down and has made the flowers and is like alchemically changing the prints, the matter, in collaborating in this experience with us. So being outside and in the rain, pulling them out of the rain and all of that was it was very, the process of making them was, you're getting your hands, in the earth. It's messy when you're making them, and so I feel like the sun is an element of all of that too.
Even though they're digital renderings of the archetypes, I feel like the dimensionality like conveys some of that tactility. Like in some of them, you will see like the 3 layers of color, that they're very their madeness feels very organic. Yeah. Any other questions from now the 25 double the
Yeah.
Another question about the process. I know some artists will press their print material first, like press it and dry it first to get more of a crisp, clean line. Did you guys do that, or did you use the fresh stuff?
So with these in particular, so these are Dickinson's pressed plants. So we're using the digital archive of those. With the ones that we made for the Brandywine, we did press some original plants, but when we're extracting pigment, we're always using fresh plants. Yeah.
Yeah, they work better if the plants are not fading, or they're juiciest and the colors are strongest, and so we recommend that. Although you'll get like these more brown tones, yellow tones towards the end of the flowers, depending on the flower. There's a lot of depending in all of this too.
Yeah, I mean, and really anything, you could go pick a blade of grass and extract color. Like anything that is growing is going to have some color and some tone to it. And so, even
Unless it's white.
Unless it's white. But otherwise, you can extract from pretty much anything. Yeah.
I'll ask them.
Sure. Go ahead.
So are you both, I know you're a professor, are you an art teacher as well?
I teach workshops, but I coach artists in their practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering how students respond to work, has that been a part of your teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I teach a historical process class, and what's interesting, there's been a real shift I can see in the way that students are thinking about photography. So when everyone was in the darkroom and digital came onto the scene, everyone made a huge dash to digital. And now I've seen like students who have just only grown up with digital are now coming back to wanting to work in the darkroom and work with historical processes. So I think there's a real shift, just like many of us feel, overwhelmed with the digital technology, and that there's something kind of magical that happens when you are actually physically making something. So they're into it for sure. I think, I teach this as a process in class, and started a little pollinator garden on campus. So thinking about like, how do we again think about photography in a more eco-friendly way, and how does the garden become a lab space rather than this kind of toxic chemicals that we have traditionally think of as a lab space.
And we're teaching a class together at Maine Media Workshops this summer on anthotypes.
Yeah.
If you know anyone.
Come on.
Come on, join us.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. Okay, well, we can just like look at the art now, unless and does anyone want to hear these two artists' gardening stories? I asked them the gardening stories earlier. I get it, there's like a couple nods. Do you want to? So yeah, 2020 happened to be the year that I learned how to garden, because it was the lockdown and I had moved to Los Angeles and had a garden. But were you both gardeners heading into this project? What did you learn about gardening through the process? How, is it still part of your lives?
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of my life for sure. I mean, I had a little garden, but really started gardening similarly, in the early pandemic when I was home, and started a flower and vegetable garden with my kids. And it was just a way to be outside and feel some sense of hope, where like we were watching things grow, and we were, growing cucumbers and harvesting them. And then I think this extension of the garden that we were growing, also just seeing what could come out of that in terms of the color and the excitement. So the garden now looks very different than it did, when we first started. And I think, when we went to that first residency, this kind of self-imposed residency, we stopped at little kind of roadside stands along the way. I drove up from North Carolina because it didn't feel safe to fly, and bought like a rose bush from Red Hook in New York, which is now a huge rose bush in the garden. So just seeing kind of the evolution of all of that has been, exciting and
And I started with my late mother's garden north of Montreal in the Canadian Laurentians, which my mother was an avid gardener, part of the McGill Gardening Club, and her whole life she was really devoted. She was obsessed with flowers. And so I inherited that along with the family and have been caring for it, not perfectly, but doing my best. But also we started a vegetable garden, quite a big one up there because it's wooded and there's a lot of space then. And that was my foray into gardening, was through the food and now also tending the flowers that are trying to keep that garden going. So that was, it was a lot of these specimens that were used in this project were my mom's garden flowers. So it's very poignant that way for me.
That's very beautiful. And I also was inspired that you two were sending in-process anthotypes or like kind of back and forth in the mail to see if you could get success in North Carolina with what wasn't kind of registering in Montreal.
Yeah, for sure. That first summer that we were working, I was, in North Carolina, that if you've been to North Carolina in the summer, it's wildly hot and humid. So I would be getting these very quick anthotypes, and I would get on FaceTime or Zoom with Amanda and be so excited to share them. And Amanda was, wrapped in sweaters and hats, and it was gray and raining, and it was taking like weeks and weeks to get an exposure. So, the weather really matters when you're thinking about making anthotypes. Like you guys, if you live here, live in the perfect anthotype.
Do it.
Yeah.
But Leah's always a good one for saying, "We just pop it in the mail. Just pop it in the mail, and I'll prepare some, send it down North Carolina."
Yeah, and we did grow all of these, although the one that we did not grow, because you find it growing in the kind of understory of the forest, is the ghost plant, which is in it's in that room, I think. The dark charcoal kind of looking one. And one of the botanists that we worked with, Peter Grimma, would find them all the time, and he put a bunch in the mail to us. And so that was kind of a mix of, I think, Peter's, and in the very beginning, it was the only thing we bought that we used was from Etsy, that Amanda bought, a little vial, a little tincture.
A few vials,
yeah.
yes.
And so lots of plant exchanges in the mail, yeah.
That's lovely, yeah, and also very 19th century
Yes.
of you to be doing in the early 21st century. Well, it was a really inspiring collaboration and a very beautiful project that touches on a lot of contemporary concerns and in very gorgeous and affecting ways. So thank you so much for talking.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's great. Well, uniquely well done. If you need to reprint that, I think you're going to do another book.
It'll be a conversation.